The distress call had been faint, barely more than a whisper against the vast silence of space. It came from a dying world, a desperate plea ignored by every major power in the galaxy. The message was simple. Asterisk, we are under attack. Our cities burn. Our people fall. Please help us. Asterisk. No one came. The Aarix Dominion had launched their invasion without mercy. A brutal race of conquerors, they swept across a defenseless planet like a storm of fire and steel. Their warships hovered above cities, raining destruction from the skies, while their soldiers marched through the streets, executing anyone who resisted. The planet, once known as Veen, was doomed to become just another name erased from the star charts, its people either enslaved or exterminated. The Galactic Council heard the call and did nothing. They muttered about diplomatic complications, non-interference treaties, and acceptable casualties. They wouldn't risk war with the Aarix over a world that held no strategic value. And so, the galaxy turned its back. But they had forgotten something. Veen, wasn't just any world, it was a human colony. And humanity never lets its own fall. Without warning, the attack fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 500 warships, a force that should not have existed. The Council had believed humanity to be weak, fractured, incapable of mustering such strength, but they had underestimated them. At the front of the fleet soared the Indomitable, a monstrous dreadnought bristling with weapons. On its bridge stood Admiral Elias Vance, his face carved from stone, his voice calm as he gave the order that would change everything. Begin orbital bombardment. Let them feel what it's like to be on the receiving end. The skies of Veen erupted in fire. The Aarix had never feared humanity. They saw them as upstarts, primitive, reckless, more suited to die in the fringes of space than waging real war. They were wrong. Humanity had spent centuries fighting among themselves, perfecting the art of war in ways no other species had. While the Council outlawed planetary invasions and discouraged total war, humanity had ignored those rules. They had built ships for a fight they hoped would never come, but had always prepared for anyway. Now, that preparation was paying off. The Indomitable S-rail cannons roared, launching slugs the size of buildings into the Aarix capital ships, tearing through shields and armor like paper. Human corvettes swarmed enemy formations, weaving between lumbering Aarix vessels and gutting them with precision strikes. Drop pods rained down like falling stars, each carrying soldiers clad in heavy exosuits designed to withstand the worst the galaxy could throw at them. They landed in the burning streets of ruined cities, and didn't stop. The Aarix had expected them to be slow, burdened by heavier armor. Instead, they moved like demons, striking fast and hard, pushing through enemy lines with relentless efficiency. Humanity fought like a species that had spent its entire existence waging war. The battle raged for hours. By the time the last Aarix warship tried to flee, it was too late. Humanity had surrounded them, leaving no escape. Admiral Vance watched as the enemy flagship burned in the void, its hull breaking apart. He did not smile. There was no joy in war, only duty. The people of Veen had been abandoned, left to die, but not by humanity. Never by humanity. Because when one of their own cried out for help, humanity answered, and they came with fire. The aftermath left the skies above Veen littered with wreckage. Burned-out husks of Aarix warships drifted silently in the void, grim testaments to humanity's response. On the ground, fires still smoldered. Buildings were reduced to rubble. Bodies, both human and Aarix, lay scattered like discarded dolls. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Elias Vance stared down at the ruined landscape below, fists clenched at his sides. Victory had come, but at a cost. Thousands of colonists had died before the fleet arrived. Entire cities had been razed. The Aarix had made sure that even in defeat, they left scars. A voice broke his thoughts. "Admiral," said Captain Liam Monroe, his second in command, "ground teams are securing the last of the Aarix prisoners. Resistance has ceased." Vance nodded, his expression unreadable. "Casualties?" "Heavy, sir, both military and civilian." He exhaled slowly. The cost of war was always blood, but that didn't mean it had to be in vain. "Open a channel to all surviving colonists," he ordered. Moments later, his voice echoed across the ruined planet. "This is Admiral Elias Vance of the Terran Defense Fleet. The ARX are defeated. Your home is yours once more. We came because no one else would, because humanity does not abandon its own." There was a pause, and to the ARX, his voice turned cold as steel. "You thought no one would come. You were wrong, and you will never forget this day." On the surface, survivors staggered from underground shelters and half-collapsed buildings. Faces were dirty, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Some wept. Others simply stared in disbelief at the sight of Terran soldiers patrolling the streets, not as conquerors, but as liberators. A young girl, no older than 10, clutched her mother's hand as she watched a squad of soldiers clearing debris from a collapsed school. One of them, his armor scratched and dented from battle, knelt beside her, pulling a ration bar from his pack. "Here, kid," he grunted, handing it over. She hesitated, then took it. "Are they gone?" she asked softly. The soldier glanced at the sky, where the wreckage of the enemy still burned. "Yeah," he said, "they're gone." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. But humanity's fight wasn't over. In the dark corners of the galaxy, the ARX Dominion reeled from their unexpected defeat. No one had ever hit them this hard, had ever made them bleed so badly. Their high command sat in stunned silence, watching footage of their burning fleet and fallen soldiers. "They weren't supposed to be capable of this," one warlord muttered. "They weren't supposed to care," another growled. The council ignored the colony. We assumed the humans would too. The supreme warlord, a towering figure with cold black eyes, leaned forward. Then we assumed wrong. His voice was low, dangerous. "Humanity is not the weak, divided species we thought. They came when no one else did, and they came with fire and vengeance." A silence stretched across the chamber. "Then we must prepare," one of the warlords finally said. "Because if they did this for a single colony, what will they do if we push them further?" The supreme warlord's fingers curled into a fist. "They will come again," he said, his eyes burning with something between fury and admiration. "And next time we must be ready." The fires of Veen, for it had barely cooled when the first whispers of war began to spread across the galaxy. The news of humanity's intervention sent shockwaves through political halls, war councils, and hidden power brokers. No one had expected them to act. No one had believed they had the strength or the will to launch such a decisive strike. But humanity had not only responded, they had annihilated the ARX invasion force. Inside the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council, an emergency session had been called. Representatives from the major species gathered in uneasy silence as footage of the battle played on the central display. The destruction was absolute. The ARX fleet, expected to crush the colony with ease, had been torn apart with terrifying efficiency. This is madness," Chancellor Valen of the Zephyr Union muttered, rubbing his scale brow. "How did they do this? They shouldn't have had the numbers. The technology." "They did," a deep voice interrupted. All eyes turned to the ARX representative, Warlord Sidhan. His dark eyes burned with barely restrained rage. "The Terrans were underestimated," he growled. "A mistake that will not be repeated." A murmur of unease rippled through the chamber. The ARX Dominion was one of the most powerful military forces in the known galaxy. If they were planning retaliation, the war that followed could shatter the fragile peace the Council had maintained for centuries. "Let's not be hasty," Counselor Orvis of the Ciari Alliance said carefully. "Perhaps this was an anomaly, a single instance of human aggression provoked by the attack on their colony. We have long known them to be emotional, protective of their own. This does not mean they are a true threat to the balance of power." Sithin's lip curled in disgust. "You are a fool if you believe that," he snapped. "Look at what they did. 500 warships. Soldiers in numbers we did not think they possessed. They crushed us, and when their admiral spoke to the survivors, he made it clear this was only the beginning." Silence fell over the room. Then from the shadows, a voice spoke. They had been preparing for war. All heads turned as High Speaker Luthen of the Ven Coalition stepped forward. The Ven were an ancient species, known for their long memories and careful strategies. They had watched humanity more closely than most. "We thought them chaotic," Luthen continued, his eyes narrowing. Unorganized, too busy fighting among themselves to be a threat. But we were wrong. He gestured toward the screen, where the Indomitable hovered over Veen, for like a silent guardian. They are not fractured. They are united. They did not hesitate to act, and they did not ask for permission. This is not the sign of a weak race. A tense silence stretched between the council members. Finally, Chancellor Veen exhaled sharply. Then we must ask ourselves a question, he murmured, one that would determine the future of the galaxy. He looked around the room, heavy with unspoken fear. Are the humans our allies or our doom? Back on Veen, for the surviving colonists worked alongside Terran soldiers, rebuilding what had been lost. Admiral Vance stood on the edge of the ruined city, gazing up at the sky where the Terran fleet still held position. This won't be the last time we do this, Captain Monroe said beside him. Vance nodded. No, it won't. She hesitated. What do you think the council will do? He exhaled slowly. They'll debate. They'll hesitate. They'll lie to themselves. Pretend we're still a small, insignificant species. Then he turned to face her, his expression hard. But the ARX won't wait. They'll come back, stronger, angrier. Monroe swallowed. And this time, Vance didn't need to answer. They both knew the truth. Veen, for it had been the spark. The fire was coming. The war drums of the ARX Dominion beat in the darkness of space. From the shattered remnants of their fleet, survivors returned to their homeworld, bearing a message of humiliation and vengeance. Inside the Grand War Hall of the ARX Dominion, Warlord Zeon stood before the gathered conclave, his body still bearing the wounds of Veen but his pride wounded far deeper. We were wrong about humanity, he growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. We thought them weak. We thought they would not come. But they did, and they brought with them a fire unlike any we have ever faced. A murmur rippled through the assembled warlords. The ARX had prided themselves on being unconquered for centuries. Yet now, the stars themselves seemed to whisper their failure. From the shadows, a towering figure stepped forward, High Warlord Vadon, the supreme leader of the Dominion. His presence alone was enough to silence the room. He fixed Zeon with an unreadable gaze. You return in disgrace, Vadon said slowly. But disgrace is not the same as defeat. Tell me, Warlord, did you learn? Zeon clenched his fists. Yes, High Warlord. He took a measured breath. We underestimated them. Their technology is not as primitive as we believed. Their strategies are not as reckless as we assumed. And worst of all, his jaw tightened. They're not afraid of us. Vadon remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he spoke. Good. The room stilled. Fear makes for weak enemies, Vadon continued, his voice calm yet chilling. I would rather face a foe that fights, a foe that bleeds, a foe that makes us stronger. His dark gaze swept over the assembled warlords. But they must understand their place, he added. Humanity has made their move. Now we make ours. Zeon straightened. Then you authorize war? Vadon smiled, a slow, predatory thing. Not yet. He turned toward a nearby holographic map, where the sectors of space flickered in brilliant blues and reds. Humanity fights with emotion, he mused. They respond when their own are threatened. So we will not threaten their colonies. We will go for the throat. We will make them fear for the home world they protect. Realization dawned across the warlords' faces. Earth, back on the far edge of Terran space, Admiral Elias Vance stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as the first wave of reinforcements arrived. The fleet was growing fast. Humanity had been preparing for war long before Veen 4. The moment the Galactic Council abandoned them, the moment the galaxy's major powers dismissed them as insignificant, humanity had known this day would come. And so they had built in secret warships constructed under the guise of defensive expansion, weapons designed that no other species had ever seen, soldiers trained for a war that no one believed they could fight. Vance turned to Captain Monroe. Status report. 20 additional warships arrived from the Martian shipyards this morning, she replied. We're integrating them into the fleet now. Ground forces are cycling through training rotations. Morale is high. Everyone knows what's coming. Vance nodded. They all felt it, the tension in the air, the quiet before the storm. Humanity had made its move. Now, they were waiting for the counterattack, and it would come. You think they'll hit the outer colonies again? Monroe asked. Vance shook his head. No. He exhaled slowly, eyes darkening. If I were them, I'd go straight for Earth. Monroe's expression hardened. Then we need to be ready. Vance turned back to the massive viewport, watching the fleet prepare. They would be ready, because when the ARX came, humanity would show them what war truly meant. Across the void, the ARX invasion fleet moved like a silent storm. Its massive warships blotted out the stars as they advanced toward their target, Earth. This time, the Dominion hadn't sent raiding parties or skirmish forces. They weren't here for resources or border colonies. They had come to end humanity before it could become a true galactic power. On the bridge of his flagship, the Eclipse of Dominion, High Warlord Vadon watched as his fleet sailed to the cold expanse of space. His expression was calm, but beneath it burned a hunger for retribution. Time to target? He asked. 3 standard days, one of his officers reported. Human fleet formations detected in the Sol system. They are preparing for war. Vadon smiled darkly. Let them prepare. This would not be a mere battle. It would be extermination. Back on Earth, the skies were alive with movement. Massive orbital platforms churned with activity as battleships were loaded with final supplies. Fighters screamed across the sky in tight formations, weaving between towering skyscrapers that had been transformed into last-resort defensive positions. Humanity had seen this coming, and they were ready. Admiral Elias Vance stood in the war room beneath the United Terran Command Center in Geneva, surrounded by holographic projections of the incoming ARX fleet. The enemy was vast. 2,000 warships, countless strike craft, and enough firepower to reduce Earth to dust. The room was tense. High-ranking officers, generals, and political leaders all stood around the table, watching as a red wave of enemy ships closed in. President Alan Graves broke the silence. What's our best estimate, Admiral? Vance's voice was steady but grim. They outnumber us 3-1. Their ships are larger, more heavily armored, and have greater energy output. A murmur spread through the room. But they don't have our technology, Vance continued. They don't have our tactics. And most of all, they don't have our will. Graves nodded slowly. Then what's the plan? Vance stepped forward, his eyes locked on the incoming enemy formation. We draw them in, make them think they're winning. We feign a desperate defense at Jupiter. We give them blood, but we don't break. When they push forward, we snap the trap shut. A new hologram flickered into existence. Hidden Terran battle groups concealed on the dark side of the moon, buried beneath Mars' surface, waiting in deep space beyond the system. When the ARX committed their forces to the final push toward Earth, humanity would cut off their retreat. Vance's voice was steel. We will turn the Sol system into a graveyard. They will come expecting conquest. They will find annihilation. The room was silent for a moment. Then President Graves nodded. Then let's give them hell. 3 days later, the ARX fleet entered the Sol system, and humanity was waiting. The ARX armada surged into the system like a tidal wave of death. 2,000 warships, countless support craft, planetary bombardment weapons capable of rendering Earth into molten ruin. From the bridge of the Eclipse of Dominion, High Warlord Vadon watched as his forces swept past the gas giants. The primitive Terran outposts stationed on Jupiter's moons were obliterated in moments. Their defenses crumbled under the sheer might of the Dominion's firepower. Resistance is weak, one of his officers reported. Terran forces are retreating toward Mars. Vadon exhaled in amusement. Good, he murmured. Let them run. Let them feel powerless before us. But as his fleet pushed deeper into the system, an uneasy sensation crept at the edges of his mind. Something was off. The humans were fighting back. Yes, but not the way he expected. They weren't making a final stand at Jupiter or Mars. They weren't throwing their full fleet into a desperate, last-ditch battle. Instead, they were withdrawing, in an orderly, calculated fashion, skirmishing just enough to slow the ARX advance before falling back again. Vathan's eyes narrowed. They weren't retreating. They were luring him in. On the dark side of the moon, deep within the concealed command center of Lunar Defense Station Aegis, Admiral Elias Vance stood with his arms crossed, watching the battle unfold in real time. The ARX were doing exactly what he needed them to do. Captain Monroe stood beside him, scanning the tactical readout. "They're pushing hard," she said. "We've lost the outer listening posts. Some of our outposts in the asteroid belt have gone dark." Vance nodded calmly. "Acceptable losses." His eyes never left a massive red cluster representing the enemy fleet. "They're too focused on the chase. They think we're running." Monroe nodded. "And when they get too close." Vance's lips curled into a grim smile. "We shut the door." Hours later, the ARX reached Earth's orbit. The planet lay before them now, bathed in blue and green, its cities glittering like jewels in the darkness of space. The home world of humanity. The prize. Vadhan stared at it, a slow smirk forming on his face. "It's over," he declared. "Begin orbital bombardment. Prepare to burn this world to ash." The command deck erupted into activity. Orders were issued. Targeting systems locked onto key cities: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow. Within minutes, the fleet would rain fire down upon them. Then the alarm screamed. "What is this?" an officer barked. Vadhan turned sharply toward the tactical display, his eyes widening as hundreds of Terran warships erupted from hidden positions behind the moon, Mars, and deep space beyond Pluto. They hadn't been retreating. They'd been lying in wait. An impossible voice cut through the chaos. "Vadhan!" The hollow screen flickered, and suddenly Admiral Elias Vance was staring straight at the ARX warlord. "You walked right into it." The human fleet opened fire. The battle for Earth had begun. The ARX fleet was in chaos. High Warlord Vadhan bared his fangs as the Eclipse of Dominion shuddered violently under the relentless barrage. Sparks rained down across the command deck, casting flickering shadows over stunned officers. The humans had ambushed them, completely and utterly. There had been no desperate defense, no last stand clinging to survival. This was a full-scale counterattack, planned with chilling precision. "Report." Vadhan roared. "Multiple capital ships destroyed," came the frantic reply. "We're being flanked. The humans were waiting for us." Vathan's mind raced. He had expected resistance. A fight, even, but not this. Not an ambush so perfectly executed that it cut off their retreat before they even realized they needed one. "We underestimated them," he growled, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. "We thought them weak. That was our mistake. But mistakes could be corrected. Pull back the second and third battle groups," he ordered. "Regroup and push forward. Crush their flanks. Break their encirclement." His warlords hesitated. "High Warlord," one finally spoke, voice tight. "Our retreat is cut off." A slow, sinking feeling settled in Vathan's gut. He turned sharply to the tactical display. Humanity's fleet had maneuvered around them with terrifying speed. Their escape routes were gone, their forces surrounded. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was an execution. Across the battlefield, Terran warships pressed the attack relentlessly. No quarter was given, no mercy shown. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Elias Vance watched as the enemy formation began to unravel. Ships fired wildly, desperately trying to carve out an escape route that no longer existed. For all their might, the ARX had been outmaneuvered. "This is it," Captain Monroe said beside him. "They're finished." Vance nodded. He activated the fleet-wide comms. "All ships engage at will." A final wave of missile salvos and railgun volleys slammed into the ARX fleet. One by one, their mighty battleships, symbols of an empire that had once seemed unstoppable, were torn apart, reduced to drifting wreckage in the void. Vathan's flagship, the Eclipse of Dominion, was the last to fall. Its burning hull spiraled toward Earth's atmosphere, its final transmission echoing through the darkness. We should have killed them before they became a threat. Then, with a final explosion, the last remnants of the ARX invasion fleet ceased to exist. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again. The wreckage of the ARX fleet drifted lifelessly in space, a silent graveyard of twisted metal and shattered warships. The once mighty armada that had come to erase humanity had been utterly destroyed. Back on Earth, cheers erupted across every city, every bunker, every military command center. People poured into the streets, waving flags, embracing strangers, crying tears of relief and victory. From the underground war rooms of Geneva to the orbital stations that had barely survived the initial skirmishes, the message was the same. Humanity had won. But on the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Elias Vance was not celebrating. He stood motionless, watching the tactical screen, his mind still processing what had just happened. The ARX Dominion was powerful, ruthless, unforgiving. And now, they had suffered the worst defeat in their history. Captain Monroe approached cautiously. "Sir, the battle is over." "We did it." Vance exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "No," he said quietly. "We won a battle. The war is just beginning." Monroe frowned. "You think they'll come back?" Vance turned to her, his expression grim. "We just humiliated one of the strongest empires in the galaxy," he said. "They won't let this stand." He glanced at the wreckage of the ARX fleet. "Next time," he continued, meeting Monroe's eyes, "they won't just send an invasion force. They'll send everything. Far beyond the Sol system, on the ARX homeworld of Zaran, the news of the catastrophe reached the throne room of the ARX High Council. The chamber was vast, dark, and lined with banners commemorating past conquests. At its center sat the Primarch of the Dominion, the supreme ruler of the ARX. His 6 golden eyes glowed dimly as he listened to the trembling voice of the warlord who had barely escaped the battle. "They fought like no species we have ever faced," the warlord stammered. "Their strategies, their ferocity, it was as if they knew every move we would make before we made it." The Primarch's claws tapped against his stone throne. "And what became of High Warlord Vadon?" The warlord hesitated, then bowed his head. "Dead, my lord. His fleet gone." Silence fell over the gathered warlords. Tension crackled in the air as they waited for the Primarch's reaction. Then, slowly, the ruler of the ARX Dominion rose from his throne. His towering form cast a long shadow across the chamber. His presence was suffocating, his aura of power undeniable. For centuries, no species had dared to stand against the Dominion. Now, humanity had shattered that illusion. They thought no one would come to their aid, the Primarch said, his voice like distant thunder. They believed they were alone. But when we came to conquer, his 6 golden eyes burned brighter. Earth's mightiest armada arrived. His claws clenched into fists. "Very well, if it is war they desire." He turned to his gathered warlords. His voice was low, but it rumbled through the chamber like a storm. "Then we shall bring them extinction." The war for humanity's survival had only just begun. The celebrations on Earth lasted for days, but Admiral Elias Vance had no time to indulge in victory. He knew the war was far from over. Inside the United Terran Command Center deep beneath Geneva, holographic displays flickered with disturbing intelligence reports. Long-range probes and deep space scouts told a terrifying story. The ARX Dominion was moving. "We've intercepted their transmissions," said Lieutenant Keto, the head of Terran intelligence. "The Dominion High Council is furious. They've declared us a cosmic infestation that must be eradicated." Vance folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "What are we looking at?" Keto tapped a command on the holo table. A new fleet materialized in the projection. It was unlike anything they had seen before. "The Dominion isn't just sending another invasion force," Keto said grimly. "They're mobilizing their entire war machine." The room fell silent. Hundreds, no, thousands, of warships, dreadnoughts the size of cities, siege platforms capable of obliterating entire continents, weapons so advanced that even the best minds in the Sol system could barely comprehend them. This is a full-scale eradication campaign," Captain Monroe said, realization dawning. "They don't just want to conquer us anymore. They want us gone." Vance's jaw tightened. He had expected retaliation. He had expected vengeance. But this was genocide in the making. President Allen Graves, standing at the head of the room, took a deep breath. "What are our options?" Vance turned back to the holomap. The odds were impossible. 3,000 Dominion warships against the battered remnants of Earth's fleet. Yet, when he looked at the faces around the table, he saw no fear, only defiance. "We fight," he said simply. Graves narrowed his eyes. "Can we win?" Vance exhaled. "We don't need to win," he replied. "We just need to make them regret coming." Across the galaxy, the largest armada in ARX history began its march toward Earth. At its helm, aboard the harbinger of extinction, stood the Primarch himself. He gazed at the distant stars, his 6 golden eyes filled with cold fury. "Let the humans gather their fleet," he murmured. "Let them believe they have hope." His claws flexed. "This time, we do not stop until their world burns to its core." And so, the final war for humanity's survival began. The storm of war came faster than anyone had predicted. Within weeks, the Dominion's apocalyptic fleet surged toward the Sol system. The vastness of their numbers was beyond anything humanity had faced before. 3,000 warships, siege platforms capable of turning planets into molten wastelands, swarms of hunter-killers designed to seek out and eliminate survivors. Against them stood Earth's last line of defense, the United Terran Armada, battered but unbroken. Every remaining warship, every station-mounted cannon, every last offensive satellite was turned toward the incoming storm. Even civilian freighters had been retrofitted with makeshift weapons. The people of Earth did not run. They did not beg for mercy. They stood. The Battle of Sol was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Dominion came with overwhelming force, but the Terran fleet fought like demons. Human warships, outnumbered and outgunned, executed daring maneuvers that defied all logic. Fleets of AI-controlled drones filled the void, slamming into Dominion vessels with terrifying precision. Orbital platforms rained nuclear fire onto the approaching enemy. And when the Dominion breached Mars' defense line, humanity deployed its final weapon, the Thanatos Protocol. Experimental dark matter warheads, forbidden by interstellar law, were detonated within the heart of the enemy fleet. Reality itself seemed to tear apart as gravitational distortions shredded hundreds of ARX warships. But even that was not enough. The Dominion pushed forward. They shattered Earth's first line of defense. They broke past Mars. They reached Earth's orbit. And then humanity did what it always did best. It adapted. Using guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and desperate last stands, human forces fought on. Even when the orbital stations fell, even when the space docks returned to rubble, humanity refused to surrender. Then, in one final act of defiance, Admiral Elias Vance led a suicide strike against the harbinger of extinction, the flagship of the Dominion Primarch himself. With his last breath, Vance detonated the Indomitable S reactor, taking the ARX leader with him. The Dominion fleet, now leaderless and bleeding, hesitated, and humanity seized the moment. From hidden bunkers on Earth, from the last surviving warships, from the depths of the asteroid belt, humanity struck back with everything they had left. The once invincible ARX broke, and when the remnants of their fleet fled, humanity did not pursue them. They simply watched. Watched as the Dominion, the once great conquerors of the galaxy, ran from the species they had sought to destroy. Years later, the scars of war still remained. Earth had been battered, but it endured. The Dominion, once the greatest power in the galaxy, had never recovered from their defeat. Other alien civilizations, once too afraid to challenge them, rose up in rebellion. The empire that had terrorized the stars for centuries began to crumble. Humanity had not just survived. They had changed the fate of the galaxy forever. And so, when future generations looked at the stars, they did not see darkness. They saw a future they had won, with blood and fire. Because when the universe came to erase them, when the Dominion believed Earth would stand alone, when all hope seemed lost, Earth's mightiest armada arrived.